The more data I uncovered, the more convinced I became that this vaccine is the most dangerous in human history. My eyes have been fully opened on the COVID vaccines and in other vaccines in general. And that suggests to me that these are not the only things that the government is lying to us about. I was a businessman minding my own business, and I had no idea that I would become the top hit when you type in misinformation superspreader.
How did you feel as you were starting to look into these numbers and starting to realize that all these people that you trusted were maybe lying, and something I think in your MIT first principles brain said, hold on a second, something doesn't statistically add up here?
I was surprised by the reaction. The people on my scientific advisory board all resigned, saying that I was a misinformation spreader. And I asked them, well, was there something that I wrote that I made a mistake on? They refused to answer, and they said, do not contact me again, ever. Even offered $1 million to the people on CDC to sit down with me for 4 hours and explain to me how I got it wrong. And they turned that down. The truth is, nobody should be getting the COVID vaccine, and nobody should be getting any vaccines, and you shouldn't be vaccinating your kids.
Besides the censorship, when you look at all of the different tactics that were used and the language and the repetition, not to mention the advertising dollars spent by some of these organizations.
Every single case where censorship has been wielded, it has always been wielded by an authority who's always on the wrong side of history. There are hundreds and hundreds of people who never spoke badly about the vaccines before. And now, all of a sudden, all these people in concert are speaking out about these vaccines. That's what it's about. It's exposing the truth, and it's having the courage that these people had to speak out and tell the truth.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go? This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Steve Kirsch, the Silicon Valley entrepreneur, philanthropist, and truth seeker. You spent the majority of your career launching and building high-tech companies, including InfoSeek, which was sold to Disney, and Frame Technology, which was later bought by Adobe. In 2020, during the early months of the pandemic, you founded the COVID-19 Early Treatment Fund with the goal of establishing which repurposed drugs could offer effective early treatment for the virus. Then, in 2021, after studying the data, you became a full-blown campaigner against the COVID-19 vaccine, and as a result, were labeled a quote-unquote misinformation superspreader. You have since founded the Vaccine Safety Research Foundation, where you're working with over 20 scientists, doctors, and statisticians to study the safety of the COVID-19 vaccines. Ultimately, you believe that the COVID jab is the most dangerous vaccine of all time, and that more than 13 million people worldwide have died because of it. Steve, welcome to London Real.
Thanks, Brian. It's good to be here.
Great to have you here. You know, you've called this vaccine the most dangerous of all time, but I know also in the beginning, you were kind of all in on it. And I know there was a quote where you said, I trusted the government, I trusted the CDC, I trusted the FDA, I got 2 shots of Moderna. And I was wondering if you could walk me through why you thought you were all in on that, and does it have anything to do with maybe even your background at MIT? You know, I graduated about 13 years after you, and I myself feel like I was a little bit blinded by the science because I was so close to science and it was such a big part of my life that anyone wielding the science, I just went along with them. And so in the beginning, I was kind of all in as well, and it wasn't until I actually had a broadcast with Robert F. Kennedy, who kind of opened me up to the human side behind the science. But I'm curious, Steve, why do you think you were so trusting of that in the beginning?
I think we're all taught to trust in authority and trust in experts because we can't all be experts in everything. And so we're typically reliant on people, and we develop a list of people and organizations that we trust over the course of our lives. And for things that we don't have the time to or expertise to go into, we basically defer to authority. I mean, it's just the way people operate. You cannot be experts in everything. And so you have to rely on others for decisions and things that you haven't personally pursued.
And in the beginning, you were really trying to study some of the treatments that were already on the market and how they might be effective. What was the feedback from that, or the pushback at the time when you were diving into that?
Well, it was disappointing to me because the scientists that I talked to all said that treatment with off-the-shelf repurposed drugs is the fastest, safest, and cheapest way to end the pandemic. And so I thought that the government would be throwing a lot of money to fund studies of various repurposed drugs to combat the virus. And I was just amazed at the lack of funding that was available for this. And I approached the Gates Foundation to get funding so that we could fund these early treatment trials. And they said that they were out of money. And I contacted BARDA, and BARDA, of course, didn't give me a dime. They put it all into vaccines. And so it was just a waste of time to try to get money out of other institutions. And I ended up tapping my friends and raised about $6 million to fund various research projects all over the world on repurposed drugs. And one of the most successful was fluvoxamine. It was featured on 60 Minutes. And more recently, there was a trial in Thailand that was done. And they found that fluvoxamine, when combined with one other drug, and there were different combinations that were tested in this trial, but any two-drug combination led to zero hospitalization from COVID. So it's just a stunning result in that trial. So it affirmed once again that fluvoxamine in combination with another drug can be effective. And it was also, there was only a 5% hospitalization rate when fluvoxamine was used alone, but a 0% hospitalization rate when it was used in combination with one other drug. And so, and this was a well-done trial. Angela Rierson, who participated in the original trials for fluvoxamine and was the person who actually came up with the concept. She was involved in that trial, and I talked to her about it, and she said it was a well done trial, and of course the results are just spectacular, showing that we never needed the vaccines at all. We could have used these repurposed drugs, and fluvoxamine, when used at the dosage and the number of dosings that are recommended in the study, is very safe. I haven't heard of anybody who's had any serious adverse events. And fluvoxamine's been on the market, of course, for 30 years.
It reminds me a little bit of what Peter McCullough was doing at the time, and kind of asking the question that nobody else was asking, as in, what about just some basic treatments you would give to anybody, suffering from these kinds of symptoms? Here are some really simple things that, as a doctor, it seems obvious to me. And when he started talking to him, it's like everybody looked at him like he was insane, and he just couldn't believe it. He's got that famous testimonial, I think, at the Texas Congress. And again, it's funny when you look at him now, it seems so obvious, but at the time, everybody was kind of jumping ahead to, vaccine, but nobody was talking about some of these common treatments. And then anytime someone would bring up some of these drugs, they were called crazy for using them. It was such a strange time.
Yeah, and there are lots of effective protocols. The FLCCC had a protocol. Peter McCullough had a protocol. A couple of doctors out of Southern California, George Fareed and Brian Tyson, had a protocol. They've treated over 20,000 patients with their protocol. And they have maybe one or two hospitalizations, and that was only when the people getting the treatment came very late. So these treatments, these early treatments, especially the Fareed and Tyson protocol, which started in March of 2020. So it was well known back then. You never have long haul COVID. So you can prevent long haul COVID with an early treatment protocol that's effective, such as the Fareed and Tyson protocol, but you also prevent hospitalization. So there was never a need for the vaccine. And they had basically safe and effective treatments using drugs that were well characterized and well known. But the CDC and everybody else in the medical community ignored this. Now, you can't treat 20,000 patients and have a couple of hospitalizations and say that, oh, they just got lucky.
But at the time, you hadn't necessarily realized that something strange might have been going on. You just thought you were just kind of getting rebuffed and people were focusing on other things. I guess only in retrospect you look back and said, oh, the reason they're ignoring this is because they can't justify the vaccine exemption if these other common drugs would actually help prevent. Is that kind of the way that worked out?
Well, I wasn't a conspiracy theorist at the time, and so I just labeled it incompetence on behalf of these agencies, because what happens when you go to medical school is you're trained that it's drilled into you that the only proof of efficacy is randomized, double-blind trials. And that's simply not true. That's not the way science works. Science works with evidence. And if I had a non-blinded study where I treated, say, 1 million people for COVID and had 0 hospitalizations, that would be completely discounted by the medical community because it wasn't randomized, double-blind study, their gold standard. And they would say, well, that's interesting, but we need the gold standard trials to actually prove whether it works or not. And you have to do a phase 2 and a phase 3 trial so that you have multiple trials to prove that it works. And this is just a distortion of what science is about. Science is about looking at what the data says and making a judgment as to what you recommend from that data. And clearly, when you had the numbers that Fareed and Tyson were talking about at the time, that could not have happened by chance. And so they should have been dropping everything and saying, let me try to replicate this. Let's try to replicate this at a clinic outside of Southern California. Let's try to replicate this somewhere else just to make sure, and then go with it. You know, that is just what the COVID virus response is, a completely inept response by the medical community, showing how really distorted they've made the science, because this virus was well treatable using techniques known in March of 2020, and it was completely ignored. And I just thought it was just basically incompetence, and because that Fauci was preaching the only way we can stop this, because a vaccine, if it worked, has the potential to basically, stop the thing in its tracks. But for a coronavirus, which is a single-stranded RNA virus, they've never had a successful vaccine against this because the virus one reason is the virus mutates too quickly. And the second reason is the virus uses a mechanism that the human immune response is really not geared for fighting, especially when you add this furin cleavage site into it, which was added by scientists to make the virus more tenacious. And so it's a man-made a virus in this case. And they chose the coronavirus because it was so infectious and because the immune system can't fight it. It has a very difficult time fighting the coronavirus. And so I think that's why it was selected for the by the U.S. Department of Defense for this for the research. And it's just a failure of the medical community and a failure of how they interpret science. It's just a colossal failure. There should be an admission by the medical community to say that, yeah, we messed up. Early treatments were the way to go. Early treatments are still the way to go, and people are still not recognizing that. People are being recommended to get a vaccine. If you're over 65, get a vaccine. If it's been over 4 months since you got your last vaccine, that's insane.
Yeah. Not to mention young children, et cetera, which we'll get to. So fast forward to 21, you had your 2 shots of Moderna. What made you start to question what was going on? I think you had some very random incidents of talking to some fellow humans, and something I think in your MIT first principles brain said, hold on a second, something doesn't statistically add up here. Is that right?
Yeah. You can fudge the science, but you can't fudge the mathematics. Mathematics always tells you the truth, especially Poisson distributions. And so if you understand how Poisson distributions work, the quick story is Poisson distribution says it's an independent event, it's a random event. And you can calculate statistics for, if you expect to see 10 events and you see 20, you can calculate the probability of that happening. And so if you normally see 100 events happening on a regular basis and you see 200 events, you can calculate that. And that's different from 10 versus 20 because the numbers are higher. So using Poisson distributions, you can make all sorts of interesting calculations as to probabilities. And so what happened to me is that I got a DM on Twitter from one of my followers asking me, is the vaccine safe? And I'm responding, of course it's safe. It's the safest vaccines ever created. And so I'm just I'm parroting the party line. And then I asked her at the end, why are you asking me this question? And she says, well, 3 of my relatives got the vaccine, and a week later, they're all dead. 3 of them were all dead. They were perfectly healthy before. And so I did a statistical calculation because they said, well, 1 out of 1 million people might die from the vaccine, and that's considered to be a safe vaccine. So if it's 1 out of a million, so it's 10 to the 18th for 3. I mean, roughly speaking, I mean that's not the exact number, but it's close to 1 in 10 to the 18th. So I said that's impossible that it was the vaccine that killed them. It must have been just a coincidence. But the chance of that happening just as a coincidence, that 3 relatives perfectly healthy die within her family, is also astronomically small. And so this didn't make any sense to me. This is like, wait a minute. Somebody's lying. And I didn't know this person on Twitter very well. So I said, let's file it in the back of my mind. And then a week later, my carpet cleaner shows up, Tim Damroth, shows up at my door, and he's wearing a mask, and I'm giving him a hard time. And I'm saying, hey, Tim, don't you know that if you have 2 vaccines, then you don't have to wear a mask? And so, again, I'm like just buying this whole thing hook, line, and sinker. And Tim said he couldn't get his second shot because after his first shot, he had a heart attack 2 minutes after the shot. And he was miserable ever since that day, that he was having enormous health problems, and he didn't want to get a second shot. And he eventually did get a second shot because his doctor said that they won't treat him unless he's fully vaccinated. So Tim succumbed to that because he was in such pain and he needed treatment. He got the second shot, and it made things even worse. And so at this point, I'm looking at I'm going to the data saying this is a little bit too weird. Somebody's lying. And I don't think it's my friends. And so I started looking at the data. I started looking at the VAERS data. I started looking at the trial data. And it was all really clear that this vaccine is a complete hoax. The more I researched it, the more data I uncovered, the more convinced I became that this vaccine is the greatest, is the most dangerous vaccine in human history. It's killed an estimated well over 10 million people, depending on whose estimates you believe. But very early on, we had an estimate. It's pretty easy to remember. It was basically 1 in 1,000 people who get the shot will end up dead because of the shot. And so if you're talking about injecting 275 million people in the United States with multiple shots, you're looking on the order. There have been like 750 million doses delivered. And so you're looking on the order of 1 million people who are killed by these vaccines in America. And then there are millions who are disabled from the vaccine, and others who are not disabled, but highly inconvenienced from the vaccine with various side effects. And then there are the people who are lucky, the 90% or so, 95% of people who are lucky and they don't experience any effects at all, and wondering, what people are talking about.
I had a guest on my show that said, a lot of those vaccines were saline solution, because if they actually vaccinated so many people, there would be so much blowback from all the injuries that it would be so obvious. And I actually thought that was kind of preposterous at the time, but I've realized that so much that I thought was preposterous and wasn't preposterous. And I'm curious for your thoughts on that.
Well, there's no real checking of that. So we don't really know, and there's no evidence of that. We haven't seen any evidence at all. In people who have checked vials randomly, there's been no evidence that people have analyzed vials that were pure saline solutions. So I don't think that's the case. I wouldn't discount it, but I just haven't seen any evidence that this is the case. And so I'm not inclined to believe that it's true. I'm open to the possibility that it could be true, but without having the evidence, I just wouldn't make that claim at all.
Can you tell me?
I would stay away from that.
How did you feel as you were starting to look into these numbers and starting to realize that, all these people that you trusted were maybe lying, and that you would even put your own health on the line? What was that like, that personal transformation? And then I guess as you started talking about it, being, completely rejected by everybody around you, that must have been a strange journey. Maybe it still is for you at this point.
Yeah. When I first looked into the data, I ended up spending about 2 or 3 weeks doing some research, and then I wrote up a 150-page article for Trial Site News entitled "Should You Be Vaccinated?" And that was published, I think it was May 25th of 2021. And I thought within weeks of that article being out there, people would realize, oh my gosh, we were misled, we made a mistake, the data is very clear. And I was surprised by the reaction, in that people would contact me. The people on my scientific advisory board all resigned, saying that I was a misinformation spreader, I'm a dangerous person, and they don't want to be associated with me anymore, and I'm not scientific. And I asked them, well, was there something that I wrote that I made a mistake on? And they refused to answer, and they said, do not contact me again, ever. And so they didn't want to identify any errors. They basically said that I was wrong, but they couldn't find a single error in what I had written. And so this was a pretty odd response in my opinion, because normally if you have a disagreement, you talk to people about what the disagreement is and you try to resolve the conflict, because sometimes the person making the claim could be wrong. But in this case, they refused to engage at all. And so they left me with, Steve, you're wrong, but we're not going to tell you why you're wrong. And so I'm left to try to figure that out on my own. And I still haven't figured out how I got it wrong, because all the data that I've collected since that time has reaffirmed my initial conclusions. So, and to this day, I even offered $1 million to the people on the FDA or the CDC advisory committee, the outside advisory committee, the ACIP. It's called the ACIP committee, ACIP, and advisory committee on immunization practices of the CDC. I offered them $1 million to sit down with me for 4 hours and explain to me how I got it wrong. So I'm really trying to find out if I got it wrong. Please tell me. $1 million. I mean, it's worth your time. And I got no responses. So I knew at that point that these people don't want to talk about the science. When you offer $1 million to someone for 4 hours of their time and they turn that down, they don't want to talk about it. Now, the only reason that they would not want to talk about it is because they know that they're wrong and they don't want to admit it. And much later in time, more recently, I spoke with the editor of one of the top medical journals, and he says, I'll be honest with you, they don't want to talk to you because they're afraid of debating you because they don't want to be shown to be wrong in public, and that's why you're not getting any debates that you want. That's why people are wielding the censorship power. They're basically retracting our papers. They're calling us misinformation spreaders, or in my case, a misinformation superspreader. And they're trying everything that they can do to discredit us. So on my Wikipedia page, for example, I had a National Caring Award that was awarded to me by Hillary Clinton in a massive auditorium in Washington, D.C., in front of a huge audience. As soon as I started speaking out against the vaccine, my National Caring Award disappeared from my Wikipedia profile for no reason whatsoever, because it would be inconsistent to characterize me as an evil anti-vaxxer if I got a National Caring Award. So they simply removed, Wikipedia basically changed history to position me as an evil person rather than one of the most generous people in America. And so this is how they do it. They do it by essentially rewriting history. It's so I'm seeing this firsthand, these kinds of techniques. And then when I complained on Wikipedia about how I was being unfairly treated, they banned me for life from commenting on Wikipedia because they said that I'm the type of a person who doesn't believe in creating an encyclopedia of accurate knowledge. So there you go.
I would think you were crazy if I hadn't been through the same thing. I always tell people we first got censored on April 6th of 2020 when we had the second largest YouTube live stream broadcast in the world, asking questions about, COVID, distancing, masks, vaccines. And then they banned that video. First time it ever happened to me in 9 years. I was a partner on that platform. I'd been down to headquarters, made them millions of dollars, had millions of subscribers. And then they pulled that video, and I always thought that it was the weirdos that got censored until it happens to you. And then you realize, oh, wow, this is how it works. How did that make you feel? And did you ever consider, backing off? Because you have a big reputation, Steve. You've done big things, Did you ever think to pause? And did you go through some emotional ups and downs at that time?
No, I didn't. And the reason I didn't is the same reason that Bobby Kennedy doesn't drop it. And I asked him, I said, do you have any regrets about the day that there was a knock on his door, and I think it was one or more women who were handing him a pile of papers on autism. And I said, do you ever regret, switching from being this environmental hero to being this pariah pursued about your vaccine views? And he said, I had no choice. I had no choice. And I feel the same way, that once you see what is going on and what the medical community is doing to America, It is so horrendous what they are doing and what they are getting away with that if I went back to a regular day job and just ignored this, hoping that this would go away and other people would fight this, I couldn't live with myself. Because this is just wrong. This is an injustice. It's not just the COVID vaccines that are problematic. It's all the vaccines. Every study that has ever been done comparing unvaccinated, truly unvaccinated kids versus fully or near fully vaccinated kids, in every single study, the unvaccinated kids did remarkably better than the vaccinated kids. And in some cases, it's orders of magnitude better in terms of incidence of diabetes, in terms of incidence of autism, in terms of ADHD, cancer, heart disease, you name it. These are extraordinary differences. And I was just looking recently at the control group, which did a study back in 2020. And the graphs are just stunning in terms of the difference in medical outcomes and diseases between the fully vaxxed or the sort of normally vaxxed, which is basically fully vaxxed Americans, versus the fully unvaxxed Americans, especially Americans who never got the vitamin K shot, right? Because that's really your first vaccine. You're told to take this vitamin shot and you're thinking, wow, this is great. They're protecting my kids. But, you can get vitamin K orally. You don't need to do it through a shot. And the shot has all sorts of things that you don't want to put into your child. And it makes a huge difference. And this showed up in the control group study that even the kids who didn't get any vaccines at all and just got the vitamin K shot were severely, there was a big difference between getting the vitamin K shot and not getting the vitamin K shot. And, to this day, you still can't convince people that to ignore the advice of their physicians or their hospital and getting the vitamin K shot. And so they start off getting the vitamin K shot, and then they go through the whole vaccination series. And there is no study ever published in the peer-reviewed literature comparing the two groups showing that the vaccinated are better off. The unvaccinated are better off by orders of magnitude in lots of these categories. And that is why they don't want to do an official NIH study on vaccinated versus unvaccinated. They have never done that. Look, if the vaccines work and people should be fully vaccinated, the NIH should be all over itself in funding these studies. And they don't. The reason they don't is because it would expose the fact that the whole vaccination program has been a complete disaster for people's health. I'm fully vaccinated, okay, until I realized the COVID vaccines were harmful. Then I started looking into it, and I found out that the whole darn thing is just causing enormous amounts of problems. And I have cancer, and I have diabetes, and I have some other health conditions that I attribute to my being fully vaccinated. Essentially, the medical community did this to me. It didn't have to happen. The people who don't get any vaccines at all are far, far healthier than the people who, like me, who got the whole series because we trusted the medical community. This thing needs to come out, and I'm very upset that to this day they have obfuscated it and that they refuse to come to the debate table. I mean, like, I would offer these people a lot of money to have a debate. I assembled a team of people who are experts in autism, for example, and I said, hey, I will pay people to come and debate this team. And I got no takers. Nobody wants to debate this because they know that they would lose in a public debate where the public gets a chance to hear from both sides. And so the defense is basically, don't show up at the debate and make sure the mainstream media never talks about this issue at all, and keep it hidden from the American people. Keep referring to this paper by this guy and these guys, and I think it was I think it's Sweden, that the very poor study that was done. and basically says, well, we don't see a signal here. Well, science doesn't work that way. You can't prove that there's no link if you don't find a signal, right? That is not proof that it doesn't exist. It's just proof that your study was insufficient to find a signal because you gamed the study and you used bad data. So there are, in fact, more studies showing the link between vaccines and autism than there are studies that show the opposite. So if you're, just on a pure numbers point of view, it's there. But, the medical community refuses to have a debate about this. And Bobby Kennedy's been trying to get a debate on autism for 20 years, and nobody will debate him. He got an attorney to debate him, but that's not debating someone who knows the science. And Alan Dershowitz badly lost that debate with Bobby Kennedy. And of course, since then, nobody wanted to debate Kennedy. Peter Hotez was offered millions of dollars to debate Kennedy, and Hotez turned it down. How does somebody turn down millions of dollars to have a debate on something like that? And Peter Hotez responded saying, well, I'll do it for $100 million. Really? $100 million just to have a discussion. That's not the way science works, and that's not the way scientists work. Real scientists don't fear a debate. Real scientists want to have a debate because real scientists are always interested in covering the truth. That's what science is about. It's a search for truth. And so Peter Hotez running from these debates is unconscionable. I mean, he should be, and he is put up on this pedestal as this authority when in fact he's just the opposite. And if he is so confident that he's right, then he should show the world that Bobby Kennedy doesn't know what he's talking about by debating him, instead of letting the world wonder who's telling the truth. And I can tell you that Bobby Kennedy's like has an encyclopedia. He's got this, I think he's got this photographic memory for facts. And so nobody wants to challenge him. And he's right. And some of these statistics are truly stunning, especially with respect to autism. Like the control group study had, it was a rate of 2% or 2.6% autism rate versus 0 in the control group study. So this is like just an incredible difference. 0 versus, it's like 1 in 33 kids or so. 35 kids is the stat from the CDC, slightly higher than the 2.6 I quoted, which was an earlier statistic. And the other thing is, I know of a medical practice in the United States, and they have vaccinated kids and they have unvaccinated kids. And they have actually a pretty large number of unvaccinated kids. And the numbers are huge, thousands of unvaccinated kids to look at. And they've had 0 cases of autism in 25 years in the fully unvaccinated kids. 0 cases of autism. That means autism isn't caused by environmental factors. If autism were caused by environmental factors or from birth, they would be seeing cases of autism. But they've got thousands and thousands and thousands of kids with no autism. CDC's not investigating, of course, because they would find that the reason is because they don't have vaccines. The same thing as in a control group study. And I did my own survey of parents, and I found that the more vaccines the kids got, the more likely they are to have autism, the more likely they are to have ADHD, autoimmune diseases. The odds ratio on autoimmune diseases was 25. I mean, that is extraordinary. So that means that basically all of the cases of autoimmune disease, if you have a peanut butter allergy and all that, it's all coming from the vaccines. And nobody's talking about this because nobody wants to have a debate on their side. So they just mischaracterize us as misinformation spreaders, when in fact, they're the ones that are declining to have a public discussion about what the data shows. And look, if my surveys are wrong, then let's co-design a survey that you think is valid, and let's go run that. But nobody wants to run the survey. They all want to rely on studies that were done using databases where all the data is kept hidden from the public. And I'm all about transparency. Let's go survey people. We can find out who's telling the truth. And every time you do those surveys, every time people have run these surveys, they found that the people who are fully unvaccinated are way, way, way better off. I mean, for heart disease, it's like 50% of Americans have, over a certain age, have signs of heart disease, and whereas it's zero. It's close to zero for the unvaccinated. I mean, it is. These implications are huge, and nobody's talking about this.
Steve, is this all about money at the end of the day, or is it more complicated than that? Is it about power? Is it about people being afraid to speak out because then they will be castigated like you? My point is it not because everyone has a direct financial interest? Is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, the thing is driven, once the Vaccine Act passed in 86, where they got immunity for these vaccines, then the drug companies looked at this as, well, I can not safety test my vaccine. All I have to do is make sure that the trials are sufficient to fool the FDA into approving my drug. And I've got a lifetime ticket here. And the states will mandate my vaccine for kids in school. And so it's a huge profit machine for these drug companies. And so the COVID trials, which showed a 90% reduction in the risk of getting COVID if you got the shots, those things were fraudulent. Those trials were completely fraudulent. There's no possible way that you can have a coronavirus where you've got a vaccine against coronavirus and that has 90% efficacy. Well, on our first try, isn't that amazing? Our first try, but it wasn't really, because people have been trying to develop coronavirus vaccines for a long time. I talked to Robert Malone about this, and he said, they might be able to get a 30% reduction. He said, in your wildest dreams, if everything were to perfectly align, the stars were to align, and everything is perfect, you had a perfect storm, you might be able to get maybe 30% efficacy. But he said 90%, no possible way. And all of the evidence that I've seen shows that these vaccines are not preventing infection. In fact, they're doing the opposite. We have data from the Santa Clara, my own local health community, Santa Clara Department of Public Health. I got a FOIA request response, and I looked at it. It's about 117,000 records, and it shows that there was 98% of the people who were diagnosed with COVID were vaccinated. This is in January of 2020. Now, today, about 95% of the people in Santa Clara County are fully vaccinated, but it wasn't even that high. But even if 95% of the people were vaccinated in January of 2020, you can't have a 98% of the people that are diagnosed with COVID being vaccinated. That means the vaccines made things worse. It's the same thing that we found in the Cleveland Clinic study and in other surveys. The vaccines actually made it more likely for you to get COVID. And then there was a study published in April, I think it was April 17th, 2023 in JAMA. It was a paper about a VA study where they looked at hospitalization of the table 1, which is the sort of the pre-treatment. Table 1 showed that the percentages of the vaccinated amongst it was comparing COVID virus versus flu virus, and it compared hospitalization rates. And it looked at your vaccination status. If you got vaccinated, if you got hospitalized for COVID, what was your COVID vaccination status and what was your flu vaccination status? And if you got hospitalized for the flu, what was your COVID vaccination status and flu vaccination status? And the vaccination statuses of the two groups were identical, which means that neither vaccine prevented the infection that it was designed to prevent. Neither vaccine worked. It was proof in table 1. It's supposed to be in table 2 that the proof is, because that's the experiment. But this was in table 1. And so...
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.
So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim. Watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real, and he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, it's Brian Rose, founder of the DeFi Academy. I've told you my 4-week crypto bootcamp is amazing, but don't take my word for it. This is what my students are saying.
The DeFi Academy was an amazing experience for me. It took me totally out of my comfort zone.
In this course, I was challenged, I was held accountable, and pushed to do things that honestly weren't always easy.
It's been phenomenal, and I can't believe we're already up on our 4 weeks. It has flown by.
Going through this DeFi accelerator by far was one of the best courses I've taken.
You do this course, you really get into the nitty-gritty of the activities that will make you comfortable with decentralized finance.
Thank you so much to Brian and everyone at London Real and the DeFi Academy for even putting together an amazing course like this.
Anybody else that wants to do it, please sign up. It is well worth the money.
Hi, it's Brian Rose from London Real. You probably know that we've just recently been re-platformed on YouTube after 25 months completely in the dark. The truth is, I really need your help. What I really need you to do is click on that subscribe button right now, like this video, and maybe even leave a comment or share the link with friends. We're really fighting against an algorithm that's tried to keep us quiet for so long, and the more subscribers we have, the more people watch our content, the better guests we can bring you, the better content, and we can continue transforming lives. We've been doing this for 14 years now. I want to do this for another 14 years, but I really need your help. So click on that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment, share this, and we're going to continue to bring you more and more great content. Thank you. Most people will never see this opportunity. Dubai luxury transformation projects have historically delivered 40 to 90% annual returns. That is incredible. These were once reserved only for insiders with access. I spent 15 years on Wall Street, and I learned this: the biggest returns always go to the people who get the call first. Now, you finally can. We've just received a brand new project with major upside potential. Allocations move fast. Click the link, apply now, and speak to my team. This is your chance to see what others never will.